They keep trying to tell me I'm crazy, that my way of being a dungeon master, of being a game master in the role-playing hobby is so out of touch, literally out of my mind, that I'm a dangerous person because I'm failing to learn how to do this role. I can't take it anymore. I've got to make this video. I'm feeling kind of under the weather and I've got a lot of IRL stuff to take care of. Nevertheless, I think it's important to just get this info out there, talk about how it's kind of a little mean and maybe toxic to tell people that they're out of their mind for something which is just a point of preference. I think that this might actually do some good to just talk about how these are ways of being a GM that just come from a different perspective. There's nothing wrong with us for liking this. If you have your own way that's different, that's totally cool. We can work from these different perspectives and even advance the craft of the game master role, even though we don't agree. And it could be even because I've raised some awareness about these things, maybe more folks will be willing to try out this way of playing, which is kind of being shamed and associated with, well, frankly, mental illness. If you're interested, hop in. I'm Antoine. I'm the Complex Games apologist. Let's get going. Let's swoosh our way down onto the work table and find out what these non-crazy ways of dungeon mastering are, shall we? If you embrace the idea of rule of law, if you prefer to not fudge dice, not change the number of monster HP, if you prefer to not rearrange the rooms in the dungeon, you prefer the quantum ogre that's in the forest to only be down one path rather than either path, regardless of which way the player characters go. If that's your style, that's perfectly fine. It is okay to go by the rule of law, to prefer just being fair when it comes to the entities in the world and the player characters as an entity in the world. If you prefer a sort of symmetry to how the NPCs go about things and how the player characters narrate their actions, the players move around the world and roll dice to get things done, if you're that way, whether this battle mech has a player character or an NPC in it, it's okay. You're not crazy. Some folks will tell you it's a story and the player characters are a protagonist. And because it's a story, maybe sometimes if a die roll, ooh, did you see how that was almost a 20 there? What if we had killed a player character at a senseless moment in the story? Would we be responsible for that? Would I have been slavishly obeying a rule and at the price of someone's fun, of someone's dreams with their player character? Would I've ruined the night? Well, it's all a matter of preference and of mutual trust. Some folks, are looking to the game master to provide a form of entertainment, and they're trusting that the GM is never going to do anything that is going to put their entertainment at risk, and that the GM is even sort of safeguarding their entertainment. I like to look at things as an equal trust. Maybe we're different. Here's a D20. It's a different shape than a D12. We can be different, and we're all people around the table. And I come here to play as the GM. I want to have fun playing and discovering and being surprised. I'm not super oriented towards telling a story. I want to discover the story with you, the players. It's fun for me. And by the same token, I'm kind of the way that I look at things, I really enjoy it when the players take responsibility for discovering that story together. Sometimes that means in a more sandboxy way. Sometimes that means exploring down kind of the obvious avenues that are before the characters, but in their own unique fashion. How that journey ends is pretty uncertain. It's a way that RPGs have always been played for a long time. And if you're not thinking of yourself as a game master who's an entertainer, if you're thinking of yourself more as a medium for folks to pass through, you're looking at yourself and you're thinking, I am a world builder. I'm making this other place. Or maybe I'm a referee and I'm trying to balance my duties of role playing the entities in the world with also my duties of adjudicating the rules. even though nobody knows which of these two is heavier, and if you're putting your hand on the scale to make sure that the player one is always heavier and the NPC one is always lighter, measure that scale based on the feedback that the game system is giving you. If you try to be fair about what you put into the world and not pile things on one side or the other of the scale to make things right, if you just want to be surprised by what happens with that scale as it tips in the balance, you're not crazy for setting aside other people's fun. Instead, you're kind of opting towards a mutual paradigm of trust that we're all here to play. We've gathered around this table together to cross a bridge into another world where we're going to be surprised and behold new events. Maybe uh, it's according to a genre, a heroic genre, a genre where destiny, where good and evil are real platonic forces like electricity is here in our world. Maybe. Nevertheless, this is a way of playing. And sometimes it can be what people really honestly prefer. Which brings us to number two. So immersion really is a thing. Some folks, as they're walking up to the table, Mr. Blue polyhedron, Mr. Orange tetrahedron walks up to the table. Some folks want to go into the other world, and the fourth wall blurry breaking ideas that NPC gets different treatment than a PC. They don't want to know that. They don't want to know that there's a story power or plot armor that their characters are wearing. And much more to the point, maybe if they ever found out that they had plot armor, it would feel like they weren't really in that other world. It would almost make their effort of coming up to that table and trying to pass through the other world into that character feel futile. Like, why'd I bother doing that? If you as a game master try and shepherd that fourth wall, that barrier that the player characters as characters in the world can't see, through the camera lens into the audience at the movie theater, that's okay if you're looking to that as an important part of your game mastery. You're not crazy. So we all know that there's a limited amount of time in the day. And when the players and the game master aren't gathered together, you're going about your life. You only have so much time to prepare for the game. When you do one thing over another, you're paying an opportunity cost. When you choose to invest yourself in one part of game preparation rather than another, we value what we do to prepare for the game in different ways. So if you budget 2 hours for making a map and you budget 3 more hours to make some NPC stat blocks, that's part of your value system as a GM. Now, there's a school of thought out there that I've been critical of. And yes, it is the Sly Flourish school of lazy dungeon mastery. That school of thought out there is out there telling folks that if you spend your time drawing a map, for example, you're wasting your time because there's lots of other people's maps that you can beg, borrow, or steal. That's absolutely true. In fact, I like to do that with tactical maps. It's my preference, though, if I was drawing a world building map, or maybe like a regional map of where the fields and the pastures were between two villages on the misty Isle of Harn, which is a very specific published campaign setting. You know what? That's okay. I'll tell you why that is something that you can do and you can spend your time on, and that you're not wasting that time. Because ultimately, one of the other things that they'll tell you is this Sly Flourish school is that if you prepare more than for the next session of play, that's a waste. You've watered down your readiness for the next day of your campaign. One of the intimations of this value system is that if you spend a lot of time building up the world or deciding how the NPCs are going to interact with a crisis and maybe creating a timeline for a Call of Cthulhu adventure, like the cultists are next going to get on a steamship from Buenos Aires and they're going to head for South Georgia Island in the Antarctic on September 1st. And you plot out their sea voyage, you reckon that they're going to meet up with a German submarine on September the 22nd. These sorts of things, you're giving yourself this other thing over here, which is a sidetrack. It's 10 hours or 10 units of GM time, which, might go in the garbage, or that the players aren't going to get to see, or maybe you're going to try and shove this into the game in such a way that it's going to make the players feel like what they do at the table isn't worth it. Okay, that's wrong. Okay. Building up the world and understanding its causes and effects can inform you at the game table. Building up these sorts of sequences can create a sense of authenticity, especially for player styles, for people who want to feel like their little person is gathered around this table, passing through and becoming immersed in the other world. By creating that objective reality, as in, you've made it up and it kind of is the way it is before they turn around the corner. A tree has fallen in the forest, regardless if someone sees it. That feeling is, it can be worthy for players too. It's okay to have your focus, at least somewhat, on world building. Your heart can still be on the table and on the passage into the other world. Don't let them make you feel bad about this. Next, I want to give an honorable mention to something which, I wish I didn't have to say. There's room in the hobby for playing a game with stat modifiers for different species. Klingons have a different ecology than human beings. Yes, there's pastiche about that relates to various human cultures, Vikings, for example, in the visual design of Klingons. Klingons, nevertheless, are an alien species. The idea is that they have different genetics, they have a whole different ecosystem and world, and that they evolved from some sort of proto-sapient stage into a culture with moral reasoning and writing and technology, and they accomplished that on their own different journey. In other words, an elf can literally be a differently abled because an elf is a different species, folks. That's not racist. If you like to play that way, it's okay for you to prefer that, and for you to understand it through a lens of ecology. I'm open to the idea that maybe this is a dangerous instrument and we need some driver's ed, just like we need to teach people how to drive a car because there's some hazards to it. I'm open to the idea that maybe the roads are not safe and there are people driving recklessly and making all kinds of really bad racist jokes by having the kobolds in town being an allegory for different ethnicities. And maybe we should talk about that. But the idea that anybody who likes that way of playing is retrogressive, that this person is backwards, that if they're saying I like to drive cars, it doesn't mean that they're a reckless vehicular manslaughterer. And this last one is especially important to me. You don't have to have an amazing amount of empathy to be a great game master. You don't have to be a Machiavellian genius who's able to push people's interpersonal buttons by reading their faces and giving them fun intuitively and sort of holding the room wrapped in attention through this sort of deep empathic connection. What do I mean by that? I mean that neurotypical people can read faces. Neurotypical people can understand folks' feelings on a moment by moment basis. And they can use that information to inform what they're going to do next. And they can veer away from some things and veer toward certain things based on how they see other people feeling. And so number 4 is about how this hobby can be for neurodiverse people. If you feel like you can't read the room, if you feel like you really can't keep up with how everybody's feeling and read everybody's mind, if you prefer to be focused on being a good referee, on being a medium for passage into the other world, for creating an ambiance, for holding in trust the game. What I mean to say by this is that you can be a great game master as a neurodiverse person with your focus not on people's feelings. If you feel like you can't understand people's feelings, if your mind doesn't go there so readily, if you get in a zone, where you're aimed at the game and the world and the rules and imagining those elves and dwarves on the road very vividly, and honestly, sometimes I lose touch with who's there. Sometimes I have a more vivid memory of the session and the player characters than I do of the other people that I played with in an evening. And I have no shame for feeling that way. I look at things in a different way. It doesn't mean that I'm broken. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong. You can be a great GM without ticking off all the boxes of the Sly Flourish Lazy Dungeon Master School, and you aren't crazy for sticking up for your way of playing. Of course, this isn't a license for anyone to say, you can't tell me I'm wrong. You can still do harm, and you can still, be so sure of yourself that you run a bad game and you're not open to criticism. But don't let people throw your ideas of what's good in this role playing hobby out of the window just for being different. Does that sound cool to you? Because I want this hobby to be welcoming and inclusive for neurodiverse people. So hopefully, even as it becomes more popular, people with kind of classical social charisma who are super outgoing, that's cool. They can be good at it in their way. I'm going to keep on aspiring towards greatness along my own path. And I hope that you'll join with me on that journey. I'm renaming this channel Game Master Growth to talk about our relationship with the hobby, to talk about how we are on our way to a place that we want to go, and that we reflect upon lessons with different parts of the game and how we can get better at them.